The gavel had barely struck when Jim Jordan leaned forward, his voice slicing through the room like a blade. He wasn't asking questions. He was performing. His words were sharp, rapid, intended not to enlighten but to overwhelm. He spoke with the swagger of someone who believed volume was the same as truth, pounding the table with every accusation, every half-baked legal theory he could spit out. Cameras zoomed in as his voice thundered across the chamber, his face reddening with each syllable. To him, this was a show he had mastered: dominate, interrupt, and silence. But across the table sat Jasmine Crockett, her posture steady, her eyes unshaken. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't flinch. She waited, patient, calculated. And then, like the sudden crack of lightning splitting the storm, she cut in. Her words were crisp, surgical, undeniable. "Mr. Jordan, if you actually understood the law you keep shouting about, you'd know you just contradicted yourself." The air shifted instantly. The clamor stopped. It was as if the walls themselves had absorbed the silence that fell. Every head turned. The staffers froze mid-note. A ripple moved through the crowd as people processed what had just happened. For years, Jordan had used sheer force to bulldoze opponents. He counted on intimidation, on bluster, on noise. But this time was different. Jasmine's voice carried no anger, no hesitation, just the steady rhythm of someone who knew. And in that moment, the power dynamic flipped. The cameras didn't miss it. Viewers watching from home felt it in their chests, the sound of arrogance being punctured by calm authority. Jordan opened his mouth to respond, but nothing came out that didn't sound smaller, weaker, exposed. The image was seared instantly into history. Jasmine Crockett, poised and unshaken, while Jim Jordan, so loud only seconds ago, sat deflated under the weight of her precision. It wasn't just a clash of voices. It was a clash of worlds, ignorance masquerading as strength versus knowledge wrapped in dignity. And the millions watching would soon realize they weren't just witnessing another political exchange. They were watching a defining moment. But this was only the beginning, because what Jasmine revealed next would shake Jim Jordan's entire image. This was no ordinary hearing. It wasn't a quiet procedural tucked away in the background of Washington. The nation was watching. Every camera lens trained on that chamber told the same story. America was on trial, not just its officials. The subject matter touched at the core of democracy, questions of justice, constitutional fidelity, and accountability in a system already fraying under pressure. For millions of Americans, this was a test of whether truth still had a place in the halls of power, or whether noise and intimidation would drown it out. And at the center of it stood Jim Jordan, a veteran of these spectacles. He had built a career out of turning hearings into personal battlegrounds. His strategy was simple: talk louder, talk faster, never let the other side breathe. To him, the chamber was not a place of deliberation. It was an arena, and he was the prize fighter. He believed that with enough bluster, the public would mistake aggression for authority. But across from him was Jasmine Crockett, new to this theater, at least in the eyes of Washington's power brokers. To many in that room, she was underestimated. A freshman lawmaker, a woman of color, a voice they assumed would be drowned out by the veterans' roar. They didn't yet know her history, her preparation, her steel. They didn't realize that she carried not just the weight of her district, but the unyielding confidence of someone who had spent years in the courtroom dismantling arguments brick by brick. The stakes could not have been higher. On one side was Jordan's arrogance, amplified by his reputation for turning hearings into shouting matches. On the other was Crockett's calm dignity, standing as a reminder that the law is not about who yells the loudest, but who understands it best. In that moment, the clash became larger than the two of them. It became a battle over what America values: spectacle or substance, arrogance or dignity, chaos or clarity. For Jordan, the hearing was supposed to be routine. He would dominate the airwaves, flood the transcripts, and leave his opponents scrambling to catch up. But his overconfidence blinded him. He didn't see that the person sitting across from him wasn't rattled, was intimidated. Crockett had walked into that chamber not to survive, but to command. Every camera angle told the story of a system in tension. The old guard shouting to hold on to relevance, the new guard demanding respect through precision and truth. Millions of viewers sitting at home, immigrants, students, working families, leaned closer to their screens, sensing that this was more than politics. This was identity, dignity, validation. Jordan leaned back in his chair, confident the match was his to control. He smirked, raised his voice, and delivered his accusations with the swagger of someone who thought the audience was already convinced. But then the shot cut back to Jasmine Crockett, her calm gaze fixed, her lips pressed into a steady line. She didn't look rattled. She looked ready. And in that stillness, viewers could sense it. Something was about to happen. Something unscripted, unforgettable. This wasn't going to be another shouting match that faded into the political noise. This was going to be the moment when arrogance met its reckoning. Viewers didn't yet realize they were about to witness a takedown that would live on forever. To understand a way to what happened that day, you have to understand Jim Jordan's playbook, because it was a playbook written not in law, not in logic, but in sheer force of personality. For years, Jordan had crafted a reputation as Congress's most aggressive brawler. He wore his lacquered jacket like a badge of honor, a signal that he wasn't there for civility or compromise. He was there to fight. And fighting for Jordan rarely meant debating facts. It meant shouting louder, talking faster, and grinding his opponents into exhaustion. Time after time, in hearing after hearing, his pattern was unmistakable. When faced with inconvenient truths, he didn't counter with evidence. He bulldozed with volume. He interrupted witnesses before they could finish their sentences, cutting off explanations with a barrage of accusations. He framed his rants as questions but never waited for answers. To Jordan, the performance was the point. The spectacle was the substance. And for a while, it worked. Headlines would capture his fiery clashes. Conservative media outlets would loop his outbursts, and he became a fixture in the partisan theater. Supporters praised his toughness, mistaking his relentless interruptions for accountability. But beneath the shouting, something critical was missing: mastery of the law. Jordan held a law degree but had never taken the bar exam, never practiced in a courtroom, never tested his understanding against real adversaries under the rules of evidence. His legal arguments often sounded strong at first glance but crumbled under scrutiny. Again and again, he relied on insinuations, half-truths, and procedural smokescreens rather than the disciplined reasoning of a lawyer. And yet, in the echo chambers of partisan politics, his approach thrived. There were moments, though, when the cracks showed. In past hearings, legal experts had corrected him mid-rant, exposing his thin grasp of the very statutes he invoked. Witnesses, armed with facts, occasionally left him grasping for words. But Jordan learned that if he just kept shouting, the corrections would be drowned out. The spectacle was enough to overshadow the substance. This was the contradiction of Jim Jordan, a man who wielded the language of law without the discipline of it, who spoke as though his voice alone carried authority, but who, beneath the bluster, revealed a hollow command of the very systems he pretended to master. His opponents often stumbled because they tried to match his pace. They let themselves be dragged into the storm, raising their voices, scrambling to rebut his rapid-fire interruptions. That was Jordan's arena. Chaos, speed, pressure. In confusion, nuance was lost, facts were buried, and the only impression left was of Jordan dominating the exchange. But what Jordan didn't anticipate was that not everyone would play by his rules. Not everyone would be baited into shouting back, and not everyone would fear the storm he conjured. Because across from him now sat Jasmine Crockett, a lawyer who had built her career not on volume, but on precision. She was someone who had faced down opponents in real courtrooms, where rules mattered, where shouting didn't win cases, and where the truth had to be proven line by line. She didn't see Jordan's style as intimidating. She saw it as sloppy. To her, his bluster wasn't strength. It was weakness hiding behind noise. The irony was almost poetic. For years, Jordan had dismissed his critics, assuming they couldn't withstand his pressure. He believed that as long as he stayed loud enough, the public would never notice the gaps in his arguments. But in Jasmine Crockett, he had met someone who wouldn't be drowned out. She wouldn't raise her voice because she didn't need to. She had something Jordan never relied on, facts sharpened like a blade. And the moment their worlds collided, the moment his volume slammed into her calm, deliberate precision, something happened that Jim Jordan never expected. The strategy that had shielded him for years suddenly became his greatest liability, because the moment he tried it with her, everything backfired. Before that hearing, before the cameras turned her calm gaze into a symbol, Jasmine Crockett had walked a path defined not by noise, but by resilience. Her story was not the story of someone born into the halls of power. It was the story of someone who had to fight for every inch of credibility, every ounce of recognition, in systems built to overlook people like her. Raised in a community where opportunity wasn't handed out, but earned through grit, Jasmine learned early the value of preparation. She wasn't the loudest voice in the room as a child, but she was always the most attentive, absorbing details others ignored, remembering what people said, noticing the inconsistencies. Where others coasted on privilege, she built her foundation brick by brick. Study, discipline, determination. When she chose law, she wasn't chasing prestige. She was chasing justice. In the courtroom, she became known for her meticulous preparation, her ability to cut through confusion and zero in on truth. Opponents who underestimated her learned quickly that what seemed like quiet confidence was actually sharpened steel. She carried the calm of someone who didn't need to shout, because she already had the receipts. Her career was filled with cases where the odds leaned against her. Clients who couldn't afford the big names found in her an advocate who believed the law should serve everyone, not just the privileged. Time and again, she walked into courtrooms where she was underestimated. Too young, too black, too female, too different from the image of authority many still clung to. And time and again, she walked out having proven them wrong. She knew the sting of being dismissed, the frustration of being talked over, the exhaustion of constantly having to be twice as prepared just to be considered equal. But she turned that into fuel. That courtroom training was her crucible. While others saw hearings as performance, she saw them as trials. And in trials, preparation is everything. You don't raise your voice to win. You use facts, precision, timing. You let your opponent's mistakes build their own downfall. You stay calm while the storm rages, because in the end, it's not the volume that matters, it's the truth. When she stepped into public service, those same qualities defined her leadership. She didn't run for office to play the game of Washington. She ran because she knew what it meant when systems failed ordinary people. She represented not just herself, but communities that had been ignored, silenced, or exploited. Every seat at the table she earned wasn't just for her. It was for everyone who had been told they didn't belong. And so when Jasmine Crockett walked into that hearing, she brought with her not just legal training, but lived experience. She knew exactly what it felt like to face men who assumed their title or their volume made them untouchable. She had faced it before, and each time she had turned their arrogance into their undoing, not by meeting them on their terms, but by forcing them to meet her on hers. It was more than skill. It was dignity. In a room built for chaos, where shouting often replaced reasoning, she embodied the power of composure. Every calm breath, every measured word reminded those watching that true authority doesn't scream. It resonates. Her presence carried a deeper resonance too. For immigrant families, for women of color, for young viewers who rarely saw themselves reflected in positions of power, Jasmine's rise was personal validation. She didn't just speak for herself. She became a mirror of possibility, proof that intelligence, preparation, and perseverance could stand unshaken even in the harshest spotlight. And this is what made her so dangerous to someone like Jim Jordan. He thrived in arenas of chaos, where his bluster could overshadow weaker opponents. But against someone like Crockett, trained in law, immune to intimidation, and fortified by years of being underestimated, that same chaos became his weakness. Because while Jordan shouted, Crockett listened. While Jordan interrupted, Crockett calculated. And while Jordan leaned on noise, Crockett leaned on truth. Every part of her journey led to that hearing. The late nights of study, the battles in courtrooms, the years of being dismissed, the lessons in patience, the resilience forged by struggle, all of it built her into exactly the person who could sit across from Jim Jordan and not just withstand him, but dismantle him. And that preparation was about to meet arrogance head-on, live on national television. Jim Jordan leaned forward, his sleeves rolled up as though bare forearms alone could prove his toughness. His voice pounded through the chamber, sharp, insistent, relentless. He fired off accusations in rapid succession, each one layered over the last before anyone had the chance to answer. It was a style he had perfected. Create chaos, leave no space or clarity, dominate with noise until even lies began to sound like truth. "You can't deny it," he barked, his words flying so quickly the stenographer struggled to keep pace. "This administration is trampling over the law, ignoring accountability, and you sit here defending it like it's normal, like it's legal." He gestured with his hands, chopped at the air, his voice growing louder as though volume itself were evidence. Others in the room shifted uncomfortably, but few dared to intervene. This was Jordan's territory, and he was convinced he owned it. But Jasmine Crockett didn't move. She didn't interrupt. She didn't even raise an eyebrow. She let him go on, watching as he unraveled his tirade into a mess of contradictions. To the untrained ear, his performance sounded forceful. But to her, every shouted claim was another opening, another careless crack in the facade of authority he worked so hard to project. When he finally paused to catch his breath, she leaned into her microphone. Her tone was steady, her delivery almost surgical. "Mr. Jordan," she began, calm and unhurried, "you've just cited a statute you clearly haven't read in full. Because if you had, you'd know the very section you're referencing undermines the point you're trying to make." The words landed like a pin drop in a cathedral. Jordan blinked, visibly thrown by the interruption he hadn't invited. He tried to recover, launching into another barrage of half-finished sentences. No, you're twisting. What I said, listen, that's not what." But the precision of her statement cut through his noise like a blade. Crockett didn't raise her voice. She didn't match his aggression. Instead, she layered fact upon fact, her tone unshakable. "You can shout as much as you want, Congressman, but the law doesn't bend to volume. It bends to what's written on the page. And right now, the page doesn't support your argument." The tension in the room tightened like a coiled spring. Staffers shifted in their seats, eyes darting from Jordan's reddening face to Crockett's unflinching composure. Viewers at home leaned closer to their screens, feeling the electricity of the moment. Jordan tried again, louder this time, as though he could shout his way back into control. "This is exactly what I'm talking about. You're dodging. This whole hearing is a dodge." But Crockett waited, letting him wind himself tighter, letting the storm roar. And then, with perfect timing, she struck again. "No, Congressman, what you're doing is ignoring the facts. And ignoring the law doesn't make you right. It just makes you louder." It was like watching a storm crash against a mountain. The wind howled, the rain lashed, but the mountain didn't move. Instead, the storm began to look small against the unshaken strength standing in its path. Every sentence Jordan threw only highlighted the contrast. He looked desperate. She looked composed. He radiated heat. She radiated control. In the clash of their styles, something deeper was revealed to everyone watching. The truth was not on his side. The room buzzed with the unspoken recognition that something extraordinary was unfolding. This wasn't just another Congressional shouting match doomed to fade into obscurity. This was a battle of substance against spectacle, and the spectacle was losing. Then came the moment that changed the entire hearing. Jim Jordan pressed forward, his words spilling faster, harsher, as if he could overwhelm reality itself by sheer force of sound. He jabbed his finger, raised his voice, layered accusation over accusation until the room itself seemed ready to fracture under the noise. He didn't notice how sloppy it had become, how contradictions tangled in his own arguments. He believed he was building momentum. In truth, he was digging a hole deeper with every sentence. And Jasmine Crockett let him. She sat still, hands folded, gaze steady. Every outburst was cataloged, every misstep noted. She didn't need to scramble or defend herself against the storm. She needed only to wait for the storm to spend itself. Slowly, the contrast became visible to everyone watching. One figure burning with chaotic energy, the other unshaken, grounded, immovable. Finally, Jordan tried to clinch a crescendo with a line meant to end the debate. "The fact is, this administration has repeatedly violated the Constitution, and you're sitting here acting like the law is on their side." He sat back, breathing heavily, convinced his words had landed. But Crockett leaned toward her microphone, her face calm, her voice measured. She spoke slowly, deliberately, each word like a nail driven with precision. "Congressman, the only thing that's been violated here is the integrity of your argument. You've cited statutes you clearly don't understand, conflated criminal law with constitutional law, and ignored entire sections of precedent that directly contradict what you said. If this were a courtroom, you would have been overruled before you finished your first sentence." A hush fell over the room. The silence was almost physical, like a curtain dropping over the chaos. Staffers glanced at one another, eyes wide. The audience in the gallery leaned forward. Even the cameras seemed to tighten their focus, knowing instinctively that something seismic had just shifted. Jordan tried to recover, his voice cracking slightly as he fumbled for a retort. That's not what I said. You're twisting." But Crockett didn't let him redirect. She continued, her tone still calm, but her precision relentless. "You claimed Section 241 of Title 18 supports your case. But if you'd read beyond the opening line, you'd know it explicitly addresses conspiracies against rights. Not only does it not support your claim, it undermines it. Loudly repeating the first half of a statute doesn't make the second half disappear." The words landed with the weight of a gavel. Gasps echoed from the back rows. A few muffled chuckles rippled through the chamber, shock mixed with disbelief that someone had finally dared to put the congressman in check so publicly. Jordan's face reddened deeper. He shuffled his papers, glanced around as though reinforcements might arrive. But no one stepped in. The moment belonged entirely to Crockett. She paused, letting the silence stretch, letting the audience feel imbalance of power flip before their eyes. Then she added with razor-sharp clarity, "Congressman, the law doesn't bend because you shout at it. It doesn't change because you refuse to read it. And no matter how many times you pound the table, the Constitution will not rearrange itself to match your misunderstanding." It was a line that broke the room. Whispers erupted. Some staffers couldn't suppress a smile. The cameras captured every flicker of Jordan's expression, his jaw tightening, his eyes darting, his composure slipping. He had been silenced, not by force, not by equal volume, but by something stronger, the truth calmly delivered. He opened his mouth to respond, but no words came. His hands hovered above his notes, as if they might provide an escape, but they betrayed him. He flipped a page, then another, searching for something that wasn't there. Every movement betrayed desperation, and Jasmine Crockett waited, not with smugness, not with mockery, but with a steady confidence that said everything without a single extra word. The silence itself became her ally. The longer it stretched, the more obvious it became. He had nothing. Reporters scribbled furiously. Photographers clicked in rapid bursts, eager to capture the image of Jordan cornered. His trademark aggression wilted under Crockett's calm. Clips would later replay the silence again and again, a moment when the man known for never shutting up had been rendered speechless. The scene unfolded like a courtroom drama. The prosecutor had laid out the case, the defense had collapsed, and the jury, millions watching at home, could see the verdict written plainly across his face. Jordan shifted again, forcing out a brittle laugh that fooled no one. "Well, that's your interpretation," he muttered, but the fight was gone. His voice lacked its usual force. The authority had drained away. Crockett leaned back, her point made. She didn't need to gloat. She didn't need to drive the knife further. The silence, the audience, the moment itself had already done the work. She had exposed not just a flaw in his argument, but the hollowness of his entire strategy. And that's when it became clear. This wasn't just another clash in Congress. This was a turning point. The man who built his power on volume had been undone by composure. The law student who never practiced in a courtroom had been schooled, live, on national television, by a lawyer who had lived her career inside them. The reaction rippled outward. Staffers whispered to each other, "Did you hear that?" Analysts watching in newsrooms began drafting headlines before the exchange had even ended. Social media feeds lit up with clips, hashtags, and instant memes. And through it all, Jasmine Crockett sat unshaken, embodying the calm authority that had dismantled her opponent without ever raising her voice. Jim Jordan's frustration spilled into every gesture now. He shuffled his notes again, tapped his pen against the table, whispered sharply to aides at his side. But the damage was done. His trademark confidence had cracked, and the cameras had caught every second. The chamber, once ruled by his volume, now belonged entirely to her silence. But the ripple effects wouldn't stop in that room. They would explode online. The chamber went quiet, but outside those walls, the noise was deafening. Within minutes, clips of the exchange began circulating online. One clip, no more than 15 seconds long, showed Jordan shouting, then cut sharply to Jasmine Crockett, dismantling him with that calm, deliberate line. That video alone racked up hundreds of thousands of views before the hearing even adjourned. By nightfall, it would be in the millions. Hashtags began trending almost instantly. Hashtag Crockett Clapback surged to the top of Twitter. Hashtag Jordan Silenced followed close behind. Users who had never before commented on congressional hearings suddenly became armchair commentators, posting reaction videos, memes, and threads breaking down the legal points she had raised. One viral post read simply, "Jim Jordan brought megaphone. Jasmine Crockett brought the law. Guess who won?" The internet did what it always does with moments of pure contrast. It exaggerated, edited, and amplified. Memes juxtaposed Jordan's red face with Crockett's calm expression, often captioned with lines like, "Volume doesn't equal victory," or "When arrogance meets preparation." TikTok edits layered dramatic music over Crockett's takedown, turning the exchange into a cinematic sequence watched on loop by millions. News outlets joined in, their coverage wall to wall. On cable networks, anchors replayed the clip, freezing the frame at the exact second Jordan's words collapsed and Crockett delivered her counter. Analysts dissected every pause, every expression, every silence that followed. On late-night shows, comedians use a moment as punchline and proof that arrogance had finally met its match. But beyond the spectacle, something deeper resonated. Supporters and celebrities chimed in, not just with applause, but with personal testimony. Actors, athletes, and activists praised her composure, calling her the embodiment of what leadership should look like. Civil rights leaders highlighted her performance as proof that preparation and dignity could cut through noise and chaos. Even those outside the political world, people who usually scroll past political clips, stopped and shared this one. For millions watching, it wasn't about partisanship or policy details. It was about seeing someone who looked underestimated, who had been dismissed by many, stand unshaken against a man who had built his career on domination. It was about dignity triumphing over arrogance, truth holding steady against distortion. The sight of Crockett holding her ground became symbolic, almost mythic, a reminder that authority isn't about volume, but about substance. And in immigrant households, in communities long used to being talked over, the moment carried special weight. Parents pointed at the screen and told their children, "This is how you answer when someone tries to silence you." Young professionals shared with the caption, "Composure is power." Teachers use it as an example of debate done right, where facts dismantle fury. The shockwaves extended into political circles, too. Some Democrats privately admitted they hadn't expected Crockett to dominate the exchange so thoroughly. They spoke of her with new respect, recognizing she had carved out a space on the national stage. Republicans scrambled to downplay the moment, but their muted reactions only highlighted the blow Jordan had suffered. The more the clip spread, the more it transformed from a congressional spat into a cultural flashpoint. Commentators began asking, was this the beginning of a new kind of leadership style? A rejection of the performative shouting match that had long defined congressional hearings? To many, it felt like a glimpse of the future. And Jasmine Crockett herself? She didn't gloat. She didn't grandstand. When asked later about the exchange, she simply said she was doing her job, bringing facts to the table, holding colleagues accountable. That humility only amplified the admiration, reinforcing the image of someone who didn't need theatrics to command attention. The dust in the clash settled slowly, but it left behind a changed landscape. Jim Jordan, once the loudest voice in any room, had been forced into silence, not by force, but by fact. Crockett had turned what could have been another forgettable shouting match into a defining moment, one that would be replayed, reshared, and remembered. And as the dust settled, a deeper lesson began to emerge. When the clips finally slowed, when the hashtag stopped climbing and the memes gave way to reflection, what remained was not just a viral exchange. It was a parable. This was never simply Jim Jordan versus Jasmine Crockett. It was noise versus truth, arrogance versus dignity, bluster versus preparation. It was a clash of two archetypes, played out under bright lights, with millions watching to see which one would prevail. Jordan had leaned on the tactics that had carried him for years. Raise your voice, cut off your opponent, flood the room with sound until substance drowns. For too long, those methods had worked. But Crockett's performance proved something larger. That volume is not victory, and intimidation collapses in the presence of knowledge calmly delivered. Her quiet authority became a kind of mirror for viewers, a reflection of struggles they had lived themselves. Who hasn't faced a bully who mistakes force for strength? Who hasn't felt the sting of being interrupted, dismissed, or talked over by someone who confuses aggression with intelligence? And who hasn't dreamed of the moment when patience, preparation, and truth cut through the noise? That was the real power of Crockett's composure. It transformed a political hearing into a universal lesson. Dignity is not weakness. It is the strongest form of resistance. Knowledge, grounded in preparation, carries more weight than 1,000 shouted accusations. And when arrogance meets that kind of grounded power, it crumbles. The resonance extended beyond politics. For teachers, it was a model of how to handle a disruptive classroom. For professionals, it was a reminder that competence outshined bravado. For children watching alongside their parents, it was a story that said, you don't need to be the loudest to be the strongest. You don't need to shout to be heard. Crockett didn't just silence Jim Jordan. She gave voice to everyone who has ever been shouted down, ignored, or underestimated. She showed that the most powerful answer is not anger meeting anger, but calm truth meeting arrogance head-on. It was cinematic not because it was rehearsed, but because it was real. And that is why this moment will live longer than the news cycle. Because it wasn't about winning an argument. It was about demonstrating a way of being in the world, a way where justice speaks softly, yet carries undeniable force, a way where dignity holds a floor, even when chaos rages around it. For the audience, the lesson was clear. We all carry that power, the power to stand steady, the power to know our truth, the power to let preparation speak louder than any insult. And when we claim that power, no bully, no matter how loud, can silence us. Jasmine Crockett didn't just make her mark in Congress that day. She became a symbol, a reminder that arrogance is fragile, but dignity endures, that noise fades, but truth echoes, and that in the end, America is strongest not when voices shout over one another, but when knowledge, preparation, and courage claim the microphone. Because in that room, on that day, something bigger than politics happened. Dignity triumphed. And the echoes of that triumph will continue to remind us. Silence arrogance with truth. And you don't just win an argument. You inspire movement. Jim Jordan came into that hearing with the same weapons he had always carried. Volume, interruption, and force. But when he unleashed them on Jasmine Crockett, something different happened. His noise collapsed under the weight of her preparation. His arrogance shattered against the wall of her composure. And the moment that unfolded became more than politics. It became a reminder of what dignity looks like when it stands its ground. The title of this story says it all. Jim Jordan silenced by Jasmine Crockett. She exposes his legal ignorance live. That wasn't just a headline. It was a truth millions witnessed in real time. A truth that reveals arrogance can be loud, but it can't withstand calm authority. And that is a lesson worth carrying forward. In a world that often rewards the brash and the boastful, Crockett proved that knowledge and dignity still win. She showed that silence is not weakness, it's strategy. That composure is not passivity, it's power. And that when truth speaks with clarity, it doesn't need to shout to be heard. If you believe in moments like this, moments where dignity silences arrogance, where composure triumphs over bluster, then don't let the story end here. Subscribe to witness more moments where truth cuts through the noise. Share this story, because the world needs heroes like Jasmine Crockett. And most importantly, carry this memory with you, because one day, you'll face your own version of Jim Jordan. Someone who tries to shout you down, overwhelm you, silence you. When that happens, remember Jasmine Crockett. Remember how she didn't just endure the storm. She stood in it, calm and unshaken, until the storm exhausted itself. And the next time arrogance tries to silence the truth, remember this moment.